The topic, though, here is very opportune, because there was a slight ripple when Pope Benedict was elected about the fact that he served in the Wehrmacht, the German army, as everybody had to. He was a teenager and they were forced to be conscripted. And that's gone away, but as it should have. But certainly this history of what the church did during the war has gone through more than just a little blip here or there. There have been some roller coaster rides of stories about Pius XII, and sometimes his greatness is exalted, but other times we see that he's castigated. And also the role of priests. Were priests simply anti-Semites inciting people to go against the Jews, or, as I think you'll be saying, were priests themselves victims? Tell us a little bit about this topic, if you would.
Well, Father, thank you very much. Yes, the Catholic Church's role in the Second World War and during the Nazi regime and the Holocaust is one of the most misunderstood and misrepresented topics that I've ever come across. That's one of the reasons I've spent a good deal of my time discussing it. If you speak to a lot of people today, they have the impression that the Catholic Church had a very, at best, equivocal record during the Second World War and the Nazi Holocaust, and that the Pope at that time really didn't live up to the moral standards that we would expect of the Pope. All of this is untrue.
Yep.
The people that make this charge are either, number one, uninformed. That's usually what it is. Most people simply don't have the time to do the study that is necessary.
And they hear propaganda.
That's correct.
Yeah.
There's two other types of people that address this issue. Some of them are people who are prejudiced and they have their agendas. They don't like the Catholic Church. They want to change certain church teachings. They just don't like the influence the church has. So that's clear what they're up and about. And the third aspect of this attack is the fact that some people are simply dishonest. I know of particular historians and books in which they write about this topic, and if you look at the footnotes, you will see many books, or some books that are that have a lot of evidence in favor of Pius XII. And they don't mention that, though, in the text of the book. I know that because I've read these books myself. A good friend of mine, who is a distinguished defense lawyer, once told me that whenever you're dealing with a kind of shady prosecutor, they always withhold evidence that's favorable to the client who's being sometimes falsely accused. In this case, that's what's happened to Pope Pius XII.
Mm-hmm.
And the good news, though, however, is this. Last time I was on EWTN, it was about 7 or 8 years ago, and I said at the time there was stirrings in the air about how a change was taking foot in favor of the Catholic Church and in favor of Pope Pius XII. And I'm very happy to say that in the last few years, remarkably, not just Catholics have been fighting this struggle for a long time, but very distinguished historians, such as Sir Martin Gilbert, one of the great Holocaust authorities of our time, Michael Burley, a great historian in Great Britain, expert on Nazi Germany. They have written books that have dispelled a lot of these rumors and have spoken out in favor of Pope Pius XII using the latest scholarly credentials. So the future for Pius XII is bright, despite all this academic and unscholarly attack against pseudo-scholarship. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Because some of these people are attacking the Pope, and it strikes me so odd. In the 90s and early parts of the 21st century, the New York Times was one of the people that was carrying water for these people.
That's correct.
And yet, when you look at the New York Times of the 1940s, during the time, they're extolling Pius XII.
All you need to do is go to the New York Public Library, any university library, and just read some of the headlines of the New York Times. I'll give you a few examples. September 28, 1939, right after Pope Pius XII issues his very first encyclical, Summa Pontificatus, a direct attack against racism, and against totalitarianism and against warmongering. And the description in that article, there was big, broad headlines: Pope condemns dictators, treaty violators, racism. And in the text of the article, it says it is Germany that stands condemned against any country. In the text of this encyclical, the Germany of Hitler and National Socialism. And then again, in 1940, in March of that year, the Pope has his one and only meeting, and it's a very frosty meeting, with a German representative, the German foreign minister. The headline of the after meeting was, Pope defends Jews in Germany. And again, I can cite editorials from the New York Times and so forth. So, they have forgotten their history, or they know about it and they're suppressing it.
Or, as I like to say about this, I said it on my show last night, if the New York Times does not feel any need to agree with the New York Times, neither do I. Now, in terms of this, though, the situation is very, very important, because I think that the biggest part of the problem are those who have an anti-Catholic bias, and that they are using this to attack the faith, because Catholicism looked pretty good during all of this. There were Catholics who did bad things, there's no doubt. But what the church was doing and the work of Pius XII and other leaders of the church were phenomenal. But also, the heroism went on another level. And that's where this book and the video, Priest Block 25487, as well as the video, The Ninth Day. These are very important, because while Pope Pius XII had one level of leadership, as the New York Times once said during the 40s, the lone voice for freedom in the continent of Europe, there are other people who are suffering on a different level. Tell us a little bit about these priests.
Well, absolutely. Thank you for asking me. One of the privileges I've had in doing all this research on Pope Pius XII is that I've not only been able to study his own pontificate, but to study the larger dimensions of the Catholic Church. And during that time, I've come across some truly remarkable stories about priests who are perhaps not nearly as well known as they should be. One of them is the extraordinary witness of Father Jean Bernard, who was the author of this memoir. Now, I knew about the memoir because he wrote it. He was, let me back up a little bit and explain. Father Bernard was a priest from Luxembourg, which is a small country. It's landlocked country. I think Belgium, France, and Germany sidelines it. And during the Second World War, he headed the Catholic Cinema Office in Luxembourg. And after the Nazis invaded that country, they directly went for all the leaders. And of course, they despised and hated the Catholic Church, because he was, long before there was the EWTN, you had people like Father Bernard who were trying to promote the Catholic way of life and Catholic teaching through, the means of communications they had at that time. So he was a sort of Father Mitch Papua during his time. Well, but
he was much better than that.
Let me say, though, that Father Bernard, as a leading Catholic spokesman of the community, was directly targeted by the Nazis. And of course, they arrested him, and they took him away to the hideous Dachau concentration camp, which is in southern Germany.
Just outside Munich.
That's correct. And they took him there, and he spent a full year there. And I'll get into the stories in a moment. Just absolutely harrowing and brutal stories. I mean, what they did to these men is beyond belief. The first thing they did, they brought you in, they stripped you, they beat you, they tortured you, they starved you, and if that didn't kill you by natural causes, then they would sometimes, on the drop of a hat, execute you. And the reason this story moved me so much, and because there have been many, many books about concentration camps, is because it speaks to me on another level. There are some books, if we're fortunate enough to read them, are truly anointed or blessed. For example, when I was a teenager, I read the autobiography of St. Teresa of Lisieux. It's a book that changed my life. I can say the same about this book, Priest Block 25487. That's the power of this book. Why? Why do I say that? Because this book has taught me in ways that no other book I've ever read has, to appreciate the Catholic priesthood in ways that I haven't in the past as I should. To appreciate the enormous sacrifices that Catholics who have witnessed to the faith throughout the long years of the Church's existence. It's also taught me, above all, Father, to appreciate the precious jewel that is our Catholic faith. We take our faith for granted. We don't realize how precious it is and how wonderful it is to live in a country, a great country like the United States of America, as Pope Benedict said today, where you have religious liberty. These things just come naturally. We just take these things for granted. Reading this book, you'll never, I can guarantee you, and I highly recommend everyone watching this, buy this book and read it, because it'll change your life. Reading this book, I can tell you, you will never underestimate or take for granted your faith again, because it shows you how precious it is, especially when you've lost it.